The following is a GBN special presentation.
Hello and welcome again to our study of church growth. You remember the last time that we were together, we looked at Nehemiah as a leader and particularly his approach to a problem. And it was quite interesting to observe the approach that he took. He was a man who literally observed before acting, for instance. He, before that though, anticipated needs. He saw what they might need when he got there, not what he knew they'd need, but what they might need. He then observed before acting, as I just said, and then finally, he was a fellow that included other people and said, I need help. Let's all work together. You know, good leaders will be like him. Now think about, what's it going to take to do this project? And then they will also observe, see what do we already have, what are the circumstances, how might we be benefited by doing it this way or doing it that way, and then finally enlist the aid of others, because no leadership, no matter how large it may be, is nearly big enough to tackle the entire problem that is before the church. The goal that we have of reaching all the lost everywhere will really require all of us to work together. Now, in this study, we want to begin to observe what happened. Nehemiah got the advantage of the people joining with him. They began to work to rebuild the wall. And by the way, I should observe that Nehemiah was right in there working with them. He had a section of wall that he was working on, just like everybody else was working. And that might be another point that we should make as an offhanded observation, and that is good leaders aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. They're not afraid to get involved in the work, and certainly he was not afraid of that. By the time you get to chapter 4, though, they're beginning to build the wall, and the enemies of the people of God see it, and they react to it in the early part just exactly like you are accustomed to people reacting. They make fun of the efforts of the people of God. They ask some sarcastic, biting questions. And it's interesting that within those sarcastic, biting questions, we literally are going to find, as it were, the keys to success in working with one another to achieve God's end. Note these questions as they are reported. We'll just read them initially and then we'll come back and think about them as we work our way along. So begin with chapter 4, verse 1. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant, and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. You can hear the sarcasm that is there, and yet ironically, if we listen to the questions, we will hear within them the keys to success. Let's start with the first question. What are these feeble Jews doing? Do you know, if we're really going to achieve anything in God's service, we need to realize where the greatness comes. That in point of fact, it is exactly correct to say that we are feeble. We are nothing. And so, for example, we see the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4, verse 13, saying about himself, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Notice not, I can do all things. Now, there are a lot of people that act that way. They act like they can do all things, but the reality is far different from that. We need God's help in order to do anything. We need to rely upon Him. We are feeble, just like they accused the Jews of being. But God is our strength. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 13, Paul had already written, "For it is God who works in you, both to will and to do His good pleasure." God is at work within us. You know, Jesus recognized that. And so in John chapter 15, we have that great parable, the parable of the vine and the branches. I want us to read that together and observe within it some very, very important points, but especially that point that we rely on God and on His Son Jesus Christ to be able to really achieve anything. Listen to Him. John 15, beginning at verse 1. "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, He prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." Now stop. Do you hear what he's saying? You're not really going to be productive if you don't abide in Jesus. Branches that have been cut off from the grapevine don't produce grapes. And Christians who are cut off from the Lord and His power don't really produce good works for God. So he goes on from there. And what does he say? "I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. But by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. So you will be my disciples. As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I heard from my Father I have made known to you." You know, when you read that whole section, you learn a lot of things. Really, Jesus was only able to accomplish what He accomplished because He and the Father worked together. And the same is true with us. We are feeble, but with God on our side, we can achieve a great victory. Now then the second question is this: will they fortify themselves? We'd probably put it a little bit differently. We'd say, will they fight? Are they ready to fight for what they really want? The truth is, as you very well know, as you read the rest of this book, that half of them were ready for battle and half were working on the wall, despite the opposition. Everybody had a spear close by, and if the sound of the trumpet sounded, they would all run to help one another so that they could repel the enemy forces that might come against them. Notice verse 16 of Nehemiah chapter 4, where it is written, "So it was from that time on that half of my servants worked at construction, while the other half held the spears and the shields, the bows, and wore armor, and the leaders were behind all the house of Judah. They worked together. Yes, they were ready to fight, but they were also ready to build. And the building would not stop just because there was the potential threat of battle. Oh, no. They kept the work going, and some stood ready holding 2 shields, 2 spears, so that when the attack came, they could hand the worker a shield and a spear, and together they could ward off the enemy. They were truly ready to fight. Go on down to verse 20. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. And there comes maybe the most important part of this whole discussion. In particular, when we're talking about the fight. You and I will not win the battle against Satan by ourselves. But as Paul said in Romans chapter 8, verse 31, if God be for us, who can be against us? Nehemiah seemed to recognize that God plus 1 is always a majority. God is greater than any army. He is able to defeat any enemy that may confront us. We need to see that. Nehemiah did. So the first question, what are these feeble Jews doing? The second question, will they fight? The third question, will they sacrifice? Now, some translations, including, by the way, this one, says, will they offer sacrifices? That's probably not the best translation here. The Old American Standard Version here has, will they give up pleasure to succeed? This is really then not will they make sacrifices in terms of offerings that might be made on an altar. Instead, it is, will they sacrifice things that they want, things that they have, in order to achieve the greater victory? And boy, that is an important question. Jesus himself in Luke chapter 9, verse 23, made this statement, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross daily and follow me. You hear that? Deny self. Sometimes to achieve great goals, we've got to deny ourselves. Now, in the physical realm, we probably can more readily see that when you think about it. For example, if we want to have maybe a new house, but we don't have the down payment, how are we going to achieve that if no one will loan it to us? Well, I'll tell you how we're going to achieve it. Instead of eating steak or instead of eating out a lot, we're going to conserve. We're going to eat beans and rice. We're going to eat a lot of chicken instead of steak. We're going to simplify our lives. We're not going to eat out as much as we did, maybe not at all. And every time that we don't do one of those things, we're going to put away the money, maybe have a jar where we drop that money and we're saving up. And finally, one day, we'll be able to open up that jar and spill all the money out and count it out, and lo and behold, we'll have enough to make a down payment. We'll get to have the house. Well, it works much the same way in service to our God. If we really want to be successful in eternity, we've got to be willing to give up certain things, to give up the ways of the world, and in place of that, to serve God. Look, for example, to Philippians chapter 3. The Apostle Paul is a very interesting character. I mean, if you thought about who were some of the prominent Jews of Paul's day, who had the most going for them in the Jewish religion, well, Paul would probably have made the top 10 list. It might have been higher than that. It might have been right at the top. I don't know. But listen to what Paul has to say in Philippians chapter 3. I want to start at verse 1 so that we really understand the whole context. Finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. For me to write the same things to you is not tedious, but for you it is safe. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the mutilation. For we are the circumcision who worship God in the Spirit. Rejoice in Christ Jesus and have no confidence in the flesh. though I also might have confidence in the flesh. If anyone else thinks that he may have confidence in the flesh, I more so. Circumcised the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. But what things were gained to me, these I have counted loss for Christ. Yet indeed I also count all things lost for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them as rubbish, that I may gain Christ, and be found in Him, not having my own righteousness, which is from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which is from God by faith, that I may know Him, and the power of His resurrection, and the fellowship of His sufferings, being conformed to His death, if by any means I may attain to the resurrection of the dead. You can hear it, can't you? Paul did sacrifice. A great leader, oh, no doubt about that, a great leader among the Jewish people. And yet, all the great things that he could have laid claim to in the human terms, he didn't lay claim to. Why not, Paul? Because I want to win Christ, he said. I want to go to heaven. That's the most important thing. And so everything that mattered to me, well, I count it like trash on the trash pile. Just thrown out with the garbage. Forget about it. It's not worth it. We need to realize the importance of sacrifice. In the book of Romans, chapter 6, that same Apostle Paul wrote to the brethren at Rome, and I want us to pick up at verse 16, because there he says, Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, His servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness? But God be thanked that you were the servants of sin, but you've obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine that was delivered unto you. Being then made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness. They were freed from sin, but how'd they do that? They gave up selfish service. They gave up trying to please themselves. And instead, they started trying to please God and live a right life, a righteous life. When they did that, they changed masters. The devil, as a master, wants you to serve yourself, and of course Him. But if you serve yourself, you'll be serving Him. Jesus wants you to give up self and serve Him. But the beauty of it is, when we give up self, He rewards us with a heavenly home. What a thought. So as we look back here to Nehemiah, we observe principles of success that are coming out of these sarcastic questions that they are asking. We've already seen that they asked, what are these feeble Jews doing? We came to realize, well, we are feeble. Without God on our side, we will not win the victory. The second question was, will they fight? And the answer again is, yes, we'll fight. We're ready to defend ourselves, but we have God on our side. The victory is assured. The third question is, will they sacrifice? Are they ready to give up some things in order to achieve their end? They may have lost hours of sleep and other things, but they were ready because they wanted the wall to be completed and the shame to be taken away. Now, the fourth question that was asked, will they complete it in a day? We probably wouldn't quite say it that way. The idea is, will determination carry them from a good start to a good end? Sometimes people get off to a great start. Are you like me? Do you have projects around the house that you started, but you've never finished? These men, these enemies of God's people, are asking that question. We see that you've begun, but will you keep on until you're finished? Will you make it all the way to the end? You and I need to wonder that and ask that of ourselves. The Apostle Paul, for instance, in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, makes this statement. He says, "And let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." Don't grow weary. Don't grow tired in well-doing. Why not, Paul? Because we're going to reap. We're going to reap what we sow. In fact, the book of Revelation has an interesting statement. Turn over there with me, if you would. Revelation, we're going to look at chapter 13. No, we're going to look at chapter 14. I apologize. Verse 13. And listen to what the Apostle John heard, revealed to him. "Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, 'Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them.'" Something that we need to understand is the Christian life is a life of service. It is a life of working all the way to the end. Yes, there is a retirement, but guess what? It's not on earth. It's in death. Oddly enough, even when we die, our works keep on working. You know that as well as I do. I can tell you today, as I stand before you, that in a certain sense of the word, my dad and my mom live on. They taught me some of the things that I'm now passing on to you. Their lives of service have influenced me. My dad, being on television for several years, influenced me to want to use this marvelous medium that we have available to us. You're like that too. Good people have influenced you. Their lives live in you. You've probably heard somebody say that about you. So work all the way to the end. Paul never said that the job was over until the hour of his death was right around the corner. And then he said, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me in that day, and not to me only, but unto all them also that love His appearing." You and I need to know that if we fight all the way to the end, if we finish the race, God will reward us. No wonder that Paul then, in writing to those brethren at Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58, would say to them, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." So the question, will they complete it in a day? Will they stop the job right here, right now? Or will they go on to a good end? I think the answer is we ought to go on to a good end. And then there's one more thing that was said, and that is, will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned? Now in this case, it is a question about the material that they are using to rebuild the wall. The idea is that the wall has been burned and now it has lost its strength. Now, I don't know about this firsthand, but I've been told that when a fire gets into a brick house, that the mortar between the bricks oftentimes literally explodes. It just blows out. So that wall, even if it's left standing, is very, very out of balance, just teetering on the brink of falling over. I also understand that because of the intense heat, sometimes the bricks lose some of their strength. So now this biting question is this material going to work? Will it hold up? Will it be able to withstand, why, even a fox going across it, Tobias says, will make it fall down. What they're building is not going to last. people questioning the material with which the church is built need to understand something. Turn over to the book of 1 Peter chapter 2, and notice what he says in verse 4 beginning. Coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. We are living stones. But what gives us our strength? Well, first of all, the very fact that we are alive. That through the blood of Christ, we have been born again. Our lives have been made new. And we are living stones connected to Him, the great giver of life. And surely we'll survive, not because we personally are strong in and of ourselves, but instead because He is strong and we rely upon Him. Go on down in the same chapter and notice beginning in verse 9 what the Apostle Peter says. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness and into His marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. We once were not good building material. I think that's evident, certainly evident in my life. But Jesus Christ made us, so to speak, good building material. Turn to the book of Ephesians and see the Apostle Paul agree effectively with what the Apostle Peter had to say. Notice beginning of verse 11 as he talks about the Gentiles, what he says. Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by what is called circumcision, made in the flesh by hands, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But listen, but now in Christ, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Later he would say that God dwells in us as a special temple. We're good building material because of the blood of the Son of God. We can succeed, but we've got to answer these biting questions correctly. We're feeble, yes, but God's with us. We will fight because God's on our side. We will sacrifice because we know the reward. We will continue to a good end. We will be good building material because Christ made us whole.